Okay, so just want to make an update on the horrific murder of the MP Jo Cox and some of the issues around this because I think it's something that is going to wake us up as a nation on some level. The press has been dominating this today, of course. I mean, has had this is the dominant issue. This is the I newspaper. It says, "Mum, proud Yorkshire lass MP shot dead while serving the people." This is the Northern Echo, which is another profile photo. And I won't show you all the press because, yeah, I've got a lot of newspapers there, but basically, been dominating the headlines today. What we know at this stage is that this guy who killed her, or is suspected, I should say, of killing her, had a history of mental illness, and he was described as a loner, but significantly, he has been tied to numerous far right ideologies. And as far away as the United States, the Southern Poverty Hate Monitoring Group, I forget its exact name, has reported that he has been tied to neo-Nazi groups in South Africa and in the UK. So this is poignant because this particular MP was known for speaking up for refugees. She was a left-wing MP. Um, it seems very plausible that this was a politically motivated assassination. Let's call it for what it was. Um, I'm not going to sort of point fingers and say if this guy was tied to any particular group. I think that would be misguided at this stage. Certainly, lots of right wing groups have denounced him and said that they have nothing to do with him. Similar things happened when Anders Breivik carried out his rampage in Norway. But there's other issues that need to be discussed here. The criminal investigation is going on. He's still being interviewed. Neighbours reported that he always said a friendly hi, but he was a bit of a loner. And that's it. There's no reports that he'd ever been arrested for previously for violence or anything like that. But clearly, this was a man who, yeah, had some extremist leanings. And this wasn't just a case that he shot her from a distance. It was a really, really brutal murder. He apparently kicked her when she was on the ground. He stabbed her before shooting her. It's really horrific. Um, hard to comprehend, really. Anyway, there's been tributes from across the political spectrum and the public. Quite moving scenes today. Both the Prime Minister, David Cameron, Jeremy Corbyn, leaders from across the political divide joined together to lay floral tributes in Birstall, which is a small market town near Leeds. Um, and, tributes pouring in from across the board. Um, it's also been said that other parties aren't going to contend. There's going to be a by election inevitably when an MP dies. There has to be a by election because obviously the people need an MP. But out of a mark of respect, the other parties are going to refrain from putting up their candidates, which I think is a nice gesture. Um, this MP had only been an MP for a year. I think, though, there is an aspect to this that I think really, if anything good comes out of this awful, awful situation, it should be a reminder to the British people that, firstly, Jo Cox demonstrates everything that was good about British parliamentarians. And that's not to say you have to agree with all of her left wing positions. I mean, in some ways, she would have been more left wing than I would be. But the point is, she was clearly a decent human being who cared for people less fortunate than herself. And you know, I've made this point in previous videos. As a nation, we are incredibly cynical about politicians. We always complain. We always lambast these people. But in the end of the day, they have a very tough job. Um, and this isn't, although this is an extreme example, it's not an isolated case. Stephen Timms was violently attacked 6 years ago. He was given the choice to put metal detectors in his constituency office. He chose not to. And that demonstrates the sort of thinking the Democratic politicians have. He chose not to, he said, because he doesn't want to create that atmosphere for his constituents. People come to their MP to bring up all sorts of issues. You know, they're anxious about issues, they're angry about issues. MPs in a democratic system want to be available to the people because it's their job. You know, in a communist society or in a totalitarian state, um, leaders never interact with people directly. You know, you get propaganda messages and all the rest of it. But in a democratic system, you know, it's the equivalent of American senators having to do town hall debates. Um, Representatives of the people, by the very nature of democracy, have to be hands on. And with that, they do run a risk of occasionally meeting confrontational or angry people, sometimes violent people. There has been a string of attacks against British MPs over the last 30 years or so. This is the first time that a woman has died, but male MPs have been killed before. Ian Gow was murdered by the IRA in 1990. Erin Neave was murdered by the IRA. Several other MPs were killed by the Irish Republican, not just the IRA, other groups as well. Stephen Timms was attacked by a woman who had Islamist sympathies because of his position on the Iraq War. So when you're putting yourself forward, arguing your case and putting in the public domain your views about something, and you're a representative of the people, there are risks involved with that. And I think the general public shouldn't lose sight of that. You know, politicians are more scrutinized probably than any other job. Okay, actors and singers may be criticized if they're not particularly good in a role, or people deem them to be not very good at a song or whatever, but politicians have a unique type of scrutiny whereby they're making decisions that impact other people and they're under a constant magnifying glass. You could argue business leaders get scrutinized as well, but I would argue they aren't quite in the public eye so much. Um, and sometimes we really do lose sight of the fact, without using hyperbole in this, that they really are human beings. And they, in the end of the day, the majority of MPs really are in it for the right reasons. You know, they may not necessarily have the right policies, and you can have strong disagreements with what they believe in, but in the end of the day, this idea that they're self-serving, firstly, the salary of an MP is, it's comfortable, but in terms of money making, politician and being a politician in Britain is by no means the most lucrative career. You know, if you're going to make big money, the financial sector or advertising or sports is going to make a lot more money than politics. Um, as for being self-serving, well, you have to think of the things that MPs put up with. Not only constant scrutiny and criticism, you know, no matter what you do, you're going to be criticised. It's also the physical toll that is involved from canvassing, you know, knocking doors, often getting hostile reaction. And there is an interesting phenomenon that people often respect their local MP more than politicians in general. So to me, that indicates that at least to some extent the media is responsible for guiding cynicism. I mean, at the moment they're paying tribute and they're being very responsible and respectful over this, I'm pleased to say. But as a nation, we need to be a little bit more understanding of what these people are doing. They're trying their level best in a difficult job. And most of them do work hard. Most of them do really try their level best. I'm not saying every MP is good. I'm not saying every MP. Um, but the point is, we have elections every 5 years, and if you don't like your MP, you have the freedom to vote them out. That's the beauty of democracy. And sometimes good MPs lose their seat because they're going against a particular tide of populism or whatever it is. And, you know, no other job, well, okay, maybe some sporting positions, but very few other jobs can someone be basically fired in front of the nation. So, if anything good comes out of this awful situation, I hope it is that the British people are just a little bit more open minded about what our elected representatives do and what they sometimes have to put up with. In a democracy, people have the right to question those in a position of power, and MPs are in a powerful position. They're making decisions that impact other people, but most of them are decent people who really, really are trying to do the right thing. And I'm not, by the way, being a hypocrite in this. I'm not just saying this because this awful thing has happened. This is a position that I've always held. And, I've made previous videos about this, but this awful situation just reasserts my conviction on this. In a democracy, people have a right to both criticize and question those in a position of power. But I think we also need to be a little bit more responsible as citizens and understand that A, these people can't do everything. B, in most circumstances, their heart is in the right place and they are trying their level best. I really believe that. And the thing is, it does irritate me when people make crass generalizations. Oh, they're all in it for themselves or they're all the same, and just demonstrates an ignorance. Jo Cox certainly wasn't in it for herself. This was a woman who dedicated her life to helping some of the world's most vulnerable people. And there's other examples across the political board of other MPs who have done similar things. There's MPs who have been ex service personnel. There's MPs who have worked for years in the charity sector. So we need to change some of the stereotypes that are out there about MPs because it just isn't fair. And, like I say, this is a price of democracy that the elected representatives do put themselves out there. And I'm sure, given a choice, the majority of MPs wouldn't want 24-hour security. They wouldn't want a siege situation where there's this block between them and the people. And not just in Britain, in other democratic countries. Various American presidents have refused direct sort of security on the grounds that they want to meet people. You don't really get it in totalitarian countries like China. You wouldn't see communist officials really getting in there and shaking hands with people and making, not that they really have constituents because there's no democracy. But the point I'm making is this is something that comes with democracy, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So the next time, and I don't want to sound like I'm preaching with this, because people have a right to dissent, but the next time you're tempted to say, oh, they're all the same, or they're only in it for themselves, or just remember this young woman was on her way to work. She was meeting constituents to address their problems. She was brutally murdered in the street. I mean, that's the raw facts. So people just need to be a little bit more, frankly, appreciative of really, what it really involves. And the media also has a role to play. Far too many media pundits are just determined to constantly be negative for the sake of being negative and constantly, frankly, promoting the cynicism. I mean, I would again revert to the way both David Cameron and Michael Gove were treated in the recent Sky News debate. Okay, they're senior politicians. Jo Cox was a junior MP, but the point is, it's a general principle here, and I try. For my part, I actually respect MPs. I respect what they go through. I respect the enormous work involved in terms of campaigning and what they do. People need to understand that if they were really in it for themselves, would they put up with all the abuse and constant scrutiny? I don't think so, because there's other industries that are far more lucrative, financially speaking, and where you wouldn't get the same level of scrutiny. So people need to consider that. That's my thoughts on this. I hope this guy doesn't get off on his so-called mental health problems. A lot of people suffer from depression. I just hope that there's justice from this, because in the end of the day, consider what her husband's going through. Consider her young children. It's appalling.